Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astuma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy and strength. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So this is an opportunity really to ask some questions which are of a non-academic nature. We reserve Sunday mornings for Vedanta series question and answer. But here what we're really doing is we're really looking at, do you have some practical problems in so-called spiritual life? And one question, of course, is what is spiritual life? I'll mute my microphone while you formulate your questions.
It sort of follows on from Jill's question last Wednesday night about our thoughts, and then what you were saying about looking at what is, and then if our thoughts all come from the past, as in from memories and knowledge, experience, etc. So when we look at things, objects, or experiences, it's coming from our conditioning and our upbringing, etc., and our experience. So everything is from the past. So is the observer then the observed, or is the observed the observer? And it also, and I've heard you saying, look at what is rather than what we think it should be, or what we desire it to be, but to look actually at what is going on. And then that brought me to thinking, which I shouldn't be thinking so much about it, but it reminds me of, if you've got the time, when we were on Tory Island and an old man was sitting at his doorstep, an elderly man, and a tourist asked him, well, what do you do all day? And the man replied, some days I sit and think, and other days I just sit. So what I'm looking to know is, when we observe things, is it all from the past? Something along those lines, Swami, please.
So a short answer to your question is no. What we observe is exactly that. So I have to clarify a few things. Is there more than one observer? Well, in a sense there is, as long as there's a presented field in front. There'll be a unit observer, which is not the thing observed. In order to register anything, three things are necessary. We have to have what is seen. We have to have some kind of seer, a perceived, a perceiver. And then there's the process of perceiving as well in between that registers it. So I'm going to be repeating a lot of what I said on Tuesday, actually. Last night, that was, where we dealt with this question. There's one particular classical text called Drik Drishya Vibeka. This is a text which is probably around about, dating from about the 14th century. But it is a wonderful text because what that means is the discernment between the seer and the seen. So now when we look at this world of multiplicity in front of us, of people, places, and events, and all these scenes that are there, we're not looking in the past, we're looking in the present. That's quite clear. And the reason why we're able to register that is there's some liveliness that is within us, some kind of thing that we can call consciousness that is flowing out through all the sense organs, arriving at the sense objects. And then there's a reverse process, there's an input. An inflow of information comes through the sense organs. But the sense organs, the real instruments of seeing, are really internal. When this waking state goes and we fall asleep, then we still see things, we still hear things. These seen and heard things are experiences from the waking state that we store away. So every thought, every movement, every action, every experience accumulates in a kind of internal library in the unconscious area. And when we have a number of different associations, they form a habit level. Technically, these various impressions, these carbon copies, these personal history records are called samskaras. Samskara, impressions. The impression doesn't leave us, it leaves an imprint. Now, the way in which we interpret all the objects externally is through our experience. And it need not be our own personal experience either, because a consensus can be there. It is a common experience that the sun rises in the morning, the common experience that the temperature on a given day is X amount. And we can even consult the meteorological office where they will say 6 degrees feels like -3 or something. I have no idea what that means, but there it is anyway. It's a wind chill factor and so on. What we're observing really is a whole field of activities that collectively we call our experience. And that experience then gets inserted into our memory bank. And when we recall it, we are recalling the past. So what we are, how we have developed what we call character, what we call personality, is an assemblage of all our learned experience. And don't think it's just human experience. It's also biological memory. And that stretches all the way back to an amoeba, all the way back to bacteria. If I was a microbiologist, I would give a very different genesis story. I'd say, in the beginning was bacteria, single-cell organisms, because that's really how life began on this planet. And it was seeded by some various things. According to the Vedas, each drop of rainfall, it's there in my daily thought, by the way, each drop of rainfall really contains some kind of individual on a journey. And then ultimately that ends up in the oceans and so on, and ends up essentially in the human body, creating some liquidity, ends up in the seed, ends up in a person, and so it goes on. So it develops. That's the story behind it. Whether we believe it or not, that's different, but that's the tale. Of course, scientific truth behind it is that all our history is an unfolding of what was originally there. So I repeat what I say many times before. When we use this term evolution, we have to really take it in its literal sense. Evolution means unfolding. You take a piece of paper, you fold it. When you unfold it, you don't get any new paper. It's the same paper. So we're dealing with a totality, and we have to get used to the idea of totality. If we don't see things as a whole thing, as a totality, what the great scientist David Bohm called the holistic way of approaching the universe, the holistic universe, with its expression, which is explicit, and its potential, which he calls implicit. That's the way he views the world in a scientific way. Very reputable physicist. He doesn't believe in quantum mechanics. He believes in Bohmian mechanics. And that's a very different approach and understanding. We won't go into that. Suffice to say, it has its various problems. But the ideal is there, that there's only one thing. Now, it looks like various different segregated things. But what is the observer that observes it? Well, it's quite clear that the objects are observed by the sense organs that stand externally on the skin. The eyes are external. The organs called the ears are external. They sit on the skin. The skin itself is external. All the sense organs, whether they are reactive or whether they are streams of information coming in, are all on the external part of our body. And we can observe these things. We can observe whether the eyeball is clear one moment, scratchy the next, whether we can refresh it, We can see whether we have an eye problem, whether we require spectacles, and all the rest of it. We can feel whether there's an ear problem. People who have tinnitus would be observing some kind of whining noise or high-pitched noise. So who's the observer when this happens? We come to the conclusion from the Drisha Viveka that this is something called manasa, unfortunately translated as mind. Now, mind is a kind of some total expression of a number of different functions within a certain field. We can call it the field of the mind, but it's much more convenient to use the Sankhya terms of, and put this off for a time being, see if it makes any difference. The Sankhya terms of antakarana, internal instrument. Some internal instrument is there, some external instrument is there, called the human body. The internal instrument is what we generically call mind. That particular part of it, that there is a registration, that is a whole range of faculties. As a unit, it observes these organs, and it also observes the field that they catch beyond it. Objects and organs are both seen, both observed. And within this mind is something peculiar called attention. It works within a framework of time. It can only alight on something per unit of time, per unit of second. So that if the ear is attuned to somebody calling me, then all the energy normally used for eyes and so on and so forth diminishes, and it all goes toward that area. If I ask people, please now let us be quiet, let us now simply listen without changing, judging, criticizing, just observing, that's all. We do it for a few moments. Then in a group you can ask, please open your eyes, what did you hear? People may hear a number of different sounds. Some may hear the whirring of a fan in the distance. Some may hear an airplane. Some may see some shuffling somewhere, hear some shuffling somewhere. Some people may hear the breath. Whatever it is, you can guarantee that whatever unit is being understood or heard, the other sounds are fading in the distance. And when that comes out, that original sound is fading in the distance, it's impossible to pay all your attention on everything all together, thankfully. Thankfully, because in the old-fashioned system of using a typewriter, supposing you say, I have all the equipment to understand everything and to do everything I want. The keys are there. The typesetting is there. All the letters are there. My intention is there. My thoughts are there. My hands are there. With all this equipment, pressing all the keys on the typewriter, you'll wind up in an entangled mess. You can use the same example, of course, on a modern computer. You say all the letters being there, all my thoughts being there, my energy being there. Let me just press all the keys in one go. You'll wind up with a great mess. A whole jungle of letters having no meaning. So we type one letter at a time. How many songs do you know? Supposing you know 20 songs. Please sing them all at once. It won't happen. We can sing one song at a time, and even then we have to sing one verse at a time, one line at a time, one note at a time. So nature has provided us with this wonderful system within time, that nothing gets confused. You don't go half mad with confusion. It's 1 unit per second. All right, that's fine. Who's observing it? What is the observer of that? What is the observer of a series of thoughts and feelings that go through this mental frame? And we can see them coming and we can see them going. We can see, for example, a reaction. Let's say anger. We can see how it rises like a wave, how it finds a peak, how it diminishes. But as soon as you say, I'm angry, you identified with the wave. And then it seems like the observed and the observed is the same thing. But when you stand back, you see there's an observer of all the changes going on. When we observe something changing, it means there's a changeless observer acting as a single unit standing behind it. And all the others are multiplicity, multiple things, and changing things, occupying various positions in space. All right. Then what is the observer that's observing all these events? Our psychologists, ancient psychologists say some other entity sits there and that observes all the goings on and is able to give a direction to any thoughts or any feelings that arise. For example, if anger comes along and I'm able to observe it, I can let it come, I can let it go. Consciously, I can put something better, a higher value in it. I can do it in the next second, the next second, the next second, the next second. And all of these seconds are mounting up in my habit level so that I'm saturating the mind with higher, nobler values and changing my habit level, changing my internal reactive nature, my personality, what we call character. Supposing I'm able to do that to the extent that 51% of all this unconscious area is saturated with noble thoughts, higher values, then I have the minimum requirement for what theology calls salvation. What the Dharmic religions will register as my saving grace from pain, my movement toward freedom. That's a minimum requirement. 51% nobility, purity, and truth, illumination, and so on, what we call collectively sattva, and 49% other things, rajas and tamas, filled with selfishness. What is selfishness? It's the misunderstanding that the most fundamental observer can get mixed up and identify with the thing which is observed. Meditation is a process where we separate these two. Drik, drishya, viveka. We separate what is seen and what is the seer. Now, the seer, of course, can never itself be seen. It's not possible. Otherwise, another seer is necessary. So, this deciding executing faculty, is this the ultimate observer? No, because we can observe that also. We can observe the decision maker. We can observe the choices that are made. We can observe the various vagaries in this section. We can see what I thought yesterday, I don't think today. We can see that we can be in a lesser mood or a better mood. All of these things we can see like a flow. So we're talking of another field which doesn't exclude all the others. Like Russian dolls. One fits into the other, one fits into the other, so it goes on. Ultimately, what are you left with? If you take the final doll out and away, in that example, you're left with nothing. In philosophy, we call this shunya. In Buddhism, it's called that, shunyata, that is emptiness. But Vedanta doesn't say that. Vedanta says actually, because it's not an object and therefore cannot be defined, it's not a nothing. It's actually a totality. It's everything. It is that and all the fields presented in front, making it impossible to say there is an observer and observed, just as it's impossible to say there is a separate thing, a separate piece of paper, something new when you unfold a piece of paper. No. So when we use these terms manifest, evolve, these are synonymous terms. Now, what is that final seer, therefore, that observes the intellect field, the mental field, the sense field, the senses, the objects? That entity is called, in this philosophy, Atman. That Atman means it is the ultimate observer, the ultimate seer. It is not observed. It can never be observed. Because an observer can never be observed, a knower can never be known, a thinker can never be thought of. If it was so, you're now on an infinite regress. Some other seer is necessary for that. There must be a final datum that when you sit there in a poised condition, all your pain and grief goes away, because it is not within the field. It is only when there's a movement in the field, and a part of that movement, a counter movement called a reaction, that we get pain and suffering and difficulties. That is why it's necessary to make this distinction. When we use the term spiritual practice, practice means only this. Clinically, only this. It means practicing this discrimination, this discernment. It doesn't matter if you put it in a devotional context. Devotional context means that nothing can outshine my beloved. That's the devotional context of this. My beloved is everything. And then when I see other things in comparison to them, I'm looking at trivial pursuit. I'm looking at the world and all its difficulties. And when we look at human love, we think it's intrinsically selfish. What we call human love is principally love of myself. There are other aspects of it that you may have experienced, particularly a mother's love for her child. That mother's love, of course, is very, very selfless, but it's only genetic. If they have that love for another person's child, then that becomes immensely noble. When we have our genetic love, it's no better than any other animal that also wants to protect its own. But when some other entity comes into the scene, it doesn't like it. Now we find glimpses of this generosity of spirit, even in animals in some cases, and naturally we find it in humans. But the human possibility for that level of generosity is most in humans. And that is why when we see this generosity of spirit, it moves us, it inspires us. We can't analyze why it happened, how it happened. Our essence within is intrinsically unconditional love. That's our own nature. When we see examples of it in the world, then it naturally moves our intrinsic nature. So this practice comprises these two things, this viveka, this discernment, whether it is discernment between what is deemed as permanent and impermanent, real, unreal, darkness, light, death, immortality. This is how it's expressed in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad prayer, the famous prayer used as a peace prayer. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyote gamaya, mrityo amritam gamaya. That is a well-known prayer. Whether it's in that line and a constant awareness of an entity that is pouring itself through, a cosmic totality pouring itself through all the various objects in time and space that we see, including limbs, including hands, heads, arms, legs, etc. Trees, plants, sunshine, sky, moon. That's one way of looking at it. That's called Jnana Yoga, often described as the process of neti-neti, an elimination. What is the truth? We know what it is not. Can we assert what it is? Yes, in a sense. We can assert it is that thing that never changes. It is that thing that is constantly there, like water being poured through. We can see this actually even in the Irish language. Today we're supposed to go off to the River Boyne, but the weather prohibited us from doing this today. Wednesday we earmark as a cultural day. And I was pleased to know, doing some preliminary research, that Boyne is a corruption of the word boim, and bo means a cow. Now, interesting enough, Irish language is an Indo-European language, therefore very related to that most ancient of those languages called Sanskrit. And so go is a cow in Sanskrit, and we have bo. And then, of course, we have the English word bovine and so on from it. And so in means something that shines, something that's white. You can literally translate it as white cow. And it was said, okay, it represents some ancient goddess, Celtic goddess probably, that that can be seen, sometimes represented as the moon. But you see, by representing it as a river, just as a cow gives milk freely and it all flows, rivers are called go something, very often Godavari, for example, because it reminds us how this grace, which is constantly flowing and manifesting and expressing itself. Why should there be a world like this? It is a world which is not only a kind of creation, but it is also, the purpose is there for our adoration as well, our realization as well. There's a wonderful book, actually, being Christmas time. We can take it in this way. It's a book by Abhishektananda. Abhishektananda was a man who lived in India from 1948 to 1972, I think it was. And he was a Catholic priest. He decided that he would take sannyas orders, which he did formally, and he would then study Hinduism in the context of Christianity. It was very, very interesting and very, very beautiful. So the way he writes, just picking this book up, he's talking about this aspect of constant practice, or what we may put in devotional life as constant presence, that we have to cultivate an awareness. It's not just a clinical neti, that kind of discernment. No, it comes with a real feeling of awareness. And that's the positive side of it. Now, supposing you put it in devotional frame, suitable for most people really, and say, what about if I see then that presence, that same constant one, in all beings, giving its light and life and love through the eyes, through the breath, never mind about a person's behavior. You see, there are no bad people, only bad behaviors. So when we judge a behavior, well, we should be quite careful, because how is our own behavior? See, so we're quick to judge. Judge not, lest ye be judged, I think the phrase goes. So we are seeing what the Upanishads are describing as the self in all beings, this Atman in all beings, and all beings in the self. What a beautiful phrase. Now, if you want to put a devotional aspect to this, then what Sri Krishna does in the Bhagavad Gita says, see me. He puts it in a devotional way. In other words, we can use our creative imagination and see our personal God that we have a personal relationship to or with in the other person, dressed up in this way. There's a beautiful story like that, which I often tell. Tolstoy understood this, and Tolstoy tells a story. In brief, the story was, I think it was a cobbler, and he lost his faith through various tragedies and so on, and decided that he would not believe unless he was able to see God, and he made a bargaining. And so the day on which he was supposed to have his vision, he never saw anything, but a number of events happened in the day. And when he finally protested, then God spoke to him and said, did you not see me dressed up as the woman who came to your door, as this boy, as that, and so on and so forth, disguised in this way? It's this totality that seems to be fragmented and divided, so that what we call a world that is observed by an observer is none other than the fragmented or seemingly fragmented observer into all the points of observation that we find throughout the universe. That's what we call our universe. So heavily disguised, we don't register it. We don't register its divine nature. That's our problem. This Abhishektananda, he writes in this chapter a beautiful thing. He says, creation is simply the manifestation and the communication, not just the manifestation, but the communication by God in total freedom of this unique and essential presence. How beautifully he puts it, see. Of the mysterious life of God in himself. Everything that exists, he says, every being that lives and thinks, does so by sharing in his being, his divine life, and his presence to himself. It is from and through this very presence of God to himself that all creatures exist, that living creatures are born, grow, and reproduce themselves, that the individual thinks, knows, and becomes aware of himself, thus attaining to the dignity of being a person, endowed with a personal calling and a destiny for time and eternity. The phrase. So this distinction between observer and the observed is not just a technical principle that has to be learned. No, it has real meaning for us. It gives us a sense of purpose. And by practicing it, it gives us a sense of poise. When we take our consciousness that is our birthright, and instead of allowing it to flow outwardly through the senses to the worldly objects that give us a level of pain, can't we now, by a systematic and scientific process, stay that and turn it inwardly, and in that make a discovery and find a place, as it were, that is a place of poise. And when we do that, because there is that only that unity, only the observer being there, with all the things observed gone, then naturally we'll have that peace that passeth all the understanding. Much of this I was telling last night. This is a repetition, actually, of what I was saying last night. So, is the observer observed? It's impossible for the observer to be observed. But our units, where we are unaware of these units being observed, are they observers? Yes, we can take it in that way. But the ultimate observer, the final observer, that finale, that final datum within us, that is only the observer, and the observer can never be observed. That is the only observer behind all the observations at the end of the day. The others are simply reflections. They're simply small echoes, if you will, of that one end. So that is, I hope that satisfies, but let me know whether you understood that.
Yes, thank you, Swamiji. You explained very well and very intricately. I shall listen to it and reflect on it in more detail. Every sentence is just profound and has got a lot of meaning. But thank you, yes. I appreciate it.
Let's give you a simple example. Let's put you in the physical realm and ask you, can you ever see yourself in totality? Let's assume that yourself is physical self. You can look in a mirror, but you can't see yourself in totality. You'll see bits and pieces. And you know people have noses and ears, so you assume you have the same thing. And the mirror tells the story as well. You can see at the end of a nose, possibly. You can see a hand, you can see an arm, you can see a leg, and so on. But you can never see your own face in totality. The seer cannot be seen. You can only see its reflection. Then what is the seer? It's that which is seeing. So that's your example.
So, Swami, the superficial observations that we make on things that come from our own past thoughts, they're not really observations, are they? As you say, they're merely reflections.
Yeah, but they're observations because anything that comes in front of an observer can be observed. So we're seeing these things in front of us here and now because we have this perception of time. And this perception of time is a necessary function. All right, we accept it. But then when we sit and recall memories, these memories are from the past. They're also being observed. like vehicles coming before us. And our states of consciousness can also be observed. So our states of consciousness are the waking state. We go into a position of memory plus deep sleep, which we call dream, that we can observe. We can recall our dreams. We do dream interpretation on it. I dreamt this in the past. All right. As if it was happening now. Things were recalled. All right. The future we don't necessarily have access to, although we could, because if you master the mind with the broader understanding, then time doesn't have any meaning. In God's area, there's no past, present, or future. When you stand where God stands, we won't see a past, a present, or a future. We'll see the eternal present. We'll be all-knowing, if you like, in a sense. Not in the most supreme sense, but in the idea that if we sit on God's throne for a while and bless from his throne, we will see things in a very different way. We'll be able to see God, see the world as God sees it. We'll agree God made the world and saw that it was good. We're seeing it as very bad because we're not seeing it from the Lord's point of view. So when things come within the mental field, when we recall instances, then naturally there's an observer that's looking at it, the comings and goings. So wherever there's a field with many, many units within it, multiplicity within it, there's always a single unitary observer. And the ultimate observer can never be observed. It is the observer, it's the supreme witness. So a waking state can be understood. I did this yesterday. A dream can be understood. I dreamt this last night. A dreamless sleep can be understood. I experienced a peace. There was no duality in it. There's no interaction with anything else. No object, no subject. For those things to be registered, I, the non-moving, the entity that never came nor went, like a station master standing on the platform seeing 3 trains come, 1 train, 2 train, 3 train. I never came with the first one. I never went with the last one. I never traveled at all. I never changed. I only registered, blew the whistle, the train moved on. I must be stationary on the platform, neither coming nor going. So this ultimate self, this ultimate observer, doesn't come and doesn't go. Now, what happens when this state of observation, all the fields of observation are no longer there? I can't call myself a witness or a seer or an observer. That requires a second thing for me to observe. I now have to change my terminology. I am the totality. I am that one without a second. Tat tamasi, that thou art. Brahmasmi, I am that Brahman, and so on. So at that point, we have to then chime in with the Mahavakyas that we find in the Upanishads. But as long as we have all the fields in front of us, including deep sleep, then we can call ourselves an observer. I am the observer. And nothing can observe me. I'm not being observed. You can't put it the other way around. I'm fond of bananas. I eat bananas. When will the banana eat me? It doesn't make any sense. So I'm not an object. I'm ultimately the subject. And when we mix the subject and object up with this one single word, I, then all our problems stem from this. So spiritual life is getting ourselves out of that position. That's why you do the Enneagram, you see. Because we know that there's a fundamental obstacle, but it's also not a standard obstacle. Each one has an individual, separate kind of ego that is assembled from all this past experience and represents our individuality. It's not a crime. It can be highly functional when we know it. It can be expressive instead of a narrowing. But as soon as it is egoism, it's a narrowing. It produces selfishness. It makes us cringe. It makes us shrink. It makes us lesser beings. Generosity makes us more expansive beings, with generosity of spirit for the welfare of all beings. It makes us broader. It makes us truly religious. So whenever you find religions fighting amongst themselves, these are just variations of egoism. These are narrowing perspectives, shrinking perspectives, selfish perspectives. When you say let's welcome all, let them find their own individual path. We're all pilgrims on the same journey. You don't have to use my route. Use your own route. Don't use my broken ladder. Select your own ladder, which is solid and steady. So this is the breadth which comes with a broader understanding that naturally develops as an unfolding. The more that things unfold, the more we see, and the more the heart moves in love. Love for all. See what the Holy Mother says. I am the mother of the virtuous and the wicked. Always think I have a mother, you see. I'm mother of all, doesn't matter. Just as a mother will not judge her child. Child can do all kinds of things. A mother won't easily disown the child. So that is the distinction. We're observing things from the past and in the present, and what the next second, that present moment has gone into the filing cabinet of the past. That's the train that we call time. And when we shift our perspective, that sense of time also goes. If I look at it from an entirely scientific physics point of view, then time, if it's a movie running forward, can easily also run backwards. Sequential moments of time has no meaning in modern day physics.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swami.
Good. So where are we on? We're at 10 minutes to go or so.
Swami,
Yes.
could you say something? This isn't. I'm not going to be very clear, but like the ultimate observer cannot be observed. If you go to the very, if I've understood correctly, which means that there's an absolute distinction between the objects and the observer.
No, there's not
So
an
the
absolute. No, there's not an absolute distinction. You see, there's only distinction when these two things are there. So you're absolutely correct. The observer can never be observed.
Yes.
But at some point of understanding, this division goes away. So that what we're seeing as the world is nothing more than the fragmented or seeming fragmented observer, because there's only one without a second. How to explain that? Oh, okay. Now we have to bring in a causal factor called appearance. It is caused by an apparitional causation. Things look as if they're fragmented. Things look as if they're moving. You see, a film looks as if it's running in continuation, but it's actually sequences of one picture, another picture, another picture. You can make it yourself. We were younger, isn't it? We make a stick figure on a piece of paper like a pad, and then the next piece of paper, one leg is lifted. Next, an arm is lifted. Like that, you run it through, it looks as if the man is running. So what we are looking at is we're looking at units run at such a speed that we see it as a continuum and make the mistake that it is permanent and real. And that has implications, practical implications for our life, not in our favor. Not in our favor because it makes death difficult for us. It makes change difficult for us.
But how does
it makes the... Yeah, go on.
Sorry, Swami. I know I'm not being very clear, but how does the sort of the ultimate observer that cannot be observed, because the witness cannot witness its own itself, but but how do you bring in devotion then? Like, is that an impersonal, or where does what does the person mean, and therefore what does how absolute is worship and devotion?
Yes, so I did mention it, but I can mention it again. Yeah. So you see the phrase is there in the Ishu Upanishad, the phrase is there in the Katha Upanishad, the phrase is there in the Bhagavad Gita. The phrase is consistent. So if we equate Atman and the personal God together, then we say seeing the self in all beings and all beings in the self is equivalent to saying seeing the personal God in all beings and seeing all beings in that overall personal God. And we use the imagination to do that, a creative imagination, adding a sense of beauty to it, adoration and love. But you see, the arrangement of the universe is such that a personal God is part of that relative reality.
Yeah.
So that personal God is what we call the cosmic mind. The cosmic mind is Ramakrishna or is Jesus or is Buddha. It depends on what relationship you put there, or depends on the form that you put there also.
Swamiji, is this one the fundamental difference between dualism and non-dualism then?
Well, dualism is a taking for granted that I'm here and God is somewhere else.
But the idea of taking a personal God.
Yes, so that form of dualism, called devotional dualism, will be to take on a personal God, something like a creator. Depends how you view the universe. If you think the universe is a creation, then that being becomes a creator. That cosmic mind is a creator. If you think that this is a protected field, then that becomes your protector. If you think that this is something like a play of waves, then that entity is a player. Now you may have noticed you now have a trinity going on, because these are three aspects of one entity. So the dualism will come to this conclusion. I am real, I'm a unit, I will be born, I'm going to die, and there is another entity that I must form a relationship with. That means that I assume I am something like a soul, a jiva. And then by tapping into this universal entity, this ultimate principle, and forming a relationship, I tap grace from it, like tapping honey from a hive. And then another position can be, well, wait, is this world exactly like that? Or is there some more completeness to it? Is there some relationship? Is there a God that stood separate and made a creation like a potter makes a pot on a potter's wheel? Or is it something like this universe was manifested from the same entity? And that is called qualified non-dualism as a deeper way of looking at it. And ultimately, that develops and opens up into a realization of oneness, where that oneness is described as non-dualism.
So if you have an Ishtadevashas, you've a chosen ideal, is that dualism in a sense, and then understanding that, well, everything is, I am everything and everything is me, or I am part of everything. There is no, one without a second. Are no boundaries. That everything is part of the one. That's non-dualism. So is it, even if do you know what I mean? So if you have a chosen ideal, but you see that as a representation, is that not dualism in a sense as well?
So the thoroughgoing dualist, by virtue of their devotion, by virtue of the grace that flows from it, will have an internal awakening, isn't it?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And the internal awakening will give a broader perspective to say, wherever I look, that Ishtadeva, that chosen ideal I see, I see that Krishna everywhere. I see that Jesus everywhere. When I see it in me, I see it everywhere. When I see it as my intimate friend, then I see it as the friend of everyone, not just my personal friend. And when I see that, I see the connectedness.
Mm.
And then there's no separation. And then ultimately that yields, oh, I see. So a process is, as I say many times, you start off by seeing that in everything, immanent in everything. Taking it from above the clouds and putting it in its immanence. So God immanent is your starting point. And then therefore, the next thing you see it as a flow through everything. How else will life happen? How else will we blink or digest our food if that flow wasn't there? That grace is flowing everywhere. That grace, that living presence must be a manifestation of like the sun with its rays. You can't separate the rays from the sun. You can't separate warmth from a fire. So there's a connectedness, but there's a difference. And then ultimately, the realization dawns, there's only one without a second. And that occurs in special moments. But for practical living, when you have to deal with the world, you embrace that duality with this understanding, deeper understanding. It is all one.
So the Ishtadevisha is a portal, a doorway.
Yes,
Ultimately.
yes. But it's not just a doorway. It's a reality.
Yeah.
It's a real entity, yes. Yeah. God can be seen. God can be heard. God can be spoken to. God can be prayed to. God can be listened to. That presence is always with you. Practicing the presence is a fundamental practice in connection with this. And that intimacy will show through. And what's shifting it is divine grace. Is there any difference between the divine and its grace? No. It's the same thing. So all of this, the capacity to speak, the capacity to listen, is all because divine grace is flowing. But there's not separate grace that you have and I have separately. You don't have a special access to it, sorry. Like the broadcast corporation, it reaches every transistor, not just your private one. But it's only one broadcasting station with one electromagnetic wave system, caught by everybody and tuned in by anybody. It's right here, right now. We don't have to go somewhere else. We don't have to go to post-mortem condition for it. We don't have to go to Valhalla or heaven or any other place. We can catch it here. So that realization dawns. Surely I can catch it here. Surely I don't have to import a broadcast from somewhere else. Then the question of death doesn't arise. What happens when my transistor breaks down? What happens to the current? What happens to the broadcast? Where do the waves go? They don't go anywhere. They're always there. Get another transistor, catch it again. This continuous catching is technically called practicing the presence, practicing the divine presence everywhere. The vital part of the dualistic practice. What is handy in Vedanta, though, and useful, is to have a whole range of tools that you can use to understand the principles of non-duality, as well as duality, and use the appropriate tool. Use the sweetness of the dual relationship. Use the sweetness of the connectedness of the Vishishtadvaita. And ultimately, in special moments, when the grace descends fully, feel that's one without a second, this sense of pure being and consciousness. And this provides two different kinds of meditation. One will be the impersonal meditation, one will be the personal meditation, one will be devotional, and one will be more general. Both are correct, and both can be used. But what is easiest, of course, is love of God. That's the easiest. The ancient people, the ancient sages, they were all jnanis. This love of God wasn't there because they were people of keen intellect and dedicated practice. They could afford to do it. But in this stage of what we might describe as Kali Yuga, in this day and age where there's so many distractions, where you walk down a road and everybody's doing thumb exercises on their cell phones, where people cannot live. I think somebody told me there was an experiment done. How long can you survive without any technology whatsoever? And I think the maximum record was 3 days. So we are deliberately agitating the mind so that the jumping mind is there already, agitating the mind with some things which could cause us greater convenience if handled properly. But if we're a slave to anything, including technology, then it becomes a distraction. And then the mind becomes extremely scattered. And the key to all of this practice, and the key to any kind of success, is concentration of mind. The capacity as some handler that is separate from what is being handled can take the attention and direct it in a chosen way like a laser beam. And when we do that, whatever it lights on yields its secrets, its innermost secrets. In that same way, when we concentrate and see this fundamental entity that religion calls God in everything, and when we feel its presence deeply, then it yields its secrets and yields its divinity to us. That's what happens.
Swami, would it be wrong to think that devotion and worship have their point in when we feel, that we're part of a world, that we're an individual in a world, that's their potency, because they help us navigate through that. But that the adviting thing is more like when one can get beyond that sense that one is in an individual in the world. I don't mean that being an individual in the world is an intellectual thing. I mean it that we can feel our subconscious coming out. We can feel our immanence in a body, and that it's a sort of like the way most people, I think, naturally feel that they are like a psychophysical unit operating in an objective world.
You see, the danger of non-dualism is to put everything in the abstract and put everything in the head and have no real growth or access or attunement, and therefore no grace that flows, and it makes a person static. So we have to develop a balance between the head, the heart, and the hand. If we are overly intellectual and we understand and we've been brought up, as it were, or we've studied this non-dualism, there's a great danger in it. And so that is why you see a guiding teacher, a competent teacher, may well tell you, wait. Why don't you please develop this aspect of the heart? Because God is love. If you want evidence of it, then understand that that entity is lovable. Who else will digest your food? Who else will present the sun? Who else will tilt the axis as it is so we get the various solstices and seasons? Who else will provide the drama of rainfall? Like that, you see. So there's a development then of wonder, adoration, and thankfulness coming in. And that opens things up and gives you access to the inner worlds. That's what you want. But of course, naturally, you can have in your two books the understanding in principle of non-dualism. But to practice it is quite difficult. It's not my words. This belongs to Krishna. He's asked the same question, which is preferable. And what he's saying is, as long as you feel embodied, then you have to take the path of the personal God. He says it very bluntly. So, as long as we feel embodied, most people feel embodied. Most people feel, when they say I, they mean the psychophysical I.
Thank you, Swami.
You see, I've heard non-dualists say, oh, dismiss everything. Oh, don't worry about that. That's only Maya, you see, that's not real. Well, pain is real. Most people will experience it. You won't say it's unreal. Bang your head on the wall, and non-dualist says, don't worry about the bump on your head. It's just all Maya. It's actually just illusion. Don't worry about it. No, it hurts. So this can lead to a very impersonal and non-compassionate entity if you take it in this way. That's an extreme. And the other extreme to do with non-dualism would say, why make any effort? Everything is one. So that is actually called laziness, lethargy. And that's the very antithesis of spirituality. Spirituality requires work, it requires effort, it requires concentration, it requires training. It requires cultivating the 6 virtues which are set out in the Vedantic literature. 4 principles are there. Firstly, you require this discernment. You require detachment. And then you require control of the mind, control of the senses. You require faith. You require forbearance. You require right action. So all of these things, kinds of things you require. You require purity all round. In short, purity of mind. And above all, there has to be a thirst. If you're a devotee, there has to be a thirst for a vision of God. And otherwise, you have to have a thirst for truth. But see, either way, a thirst has to be there. And that has to be feeling, you see. So there are many devotees who say, I'm not getting anywhere in spiritual practice. I have a mantra, I repeat the mantra and so on and so forth, but everything is dry and I can't really make any progress, and so I don't know what to do. Well, did you try inserting some feeling into it? Or did you just make it abstract? Supposing you have a series of words in a kind of internal script that you roll out, and you call that contemplation or meditation, and each word has a corresponding concept. And supposing you don't put any feeling in it, you'll get bored and go and you'll sleep. Boredom will produce sleep. There has to be a feeling in it. See?
Yeah.
When you look at a sunrise or sunset, and I'm thinking immediately, you see, of okay, thank you. The person who sent me the text, thank you. So when you look at a sunset, let's say, in the vicinity of Darjeeling, see people queue up. They're prepared to wait long hours for it. Naturally, it evokes a feeling. There's a sympathetic movement that shifts within when it's seen. But if you just say, oh, I've seen the sun before, so what? Send me a picture. And there's no feeling within it, then what will be the value of it? I won't go there, I won't go to Darjeeling because I saw it on YouTube. Well, no. Did you feel the wind against your cheek? Did you experience the fresh air? Did you see the actual movement? Did you catch the glory of it? The feeling, the atmosphere, the totality of it, and so on and so forth. But the danger in this day and age with the COVID, for example, is put everything in a virtual mode. You won't get the real experience of it.
Mm.
So you have to add deep feeling, deep feeling. All of us are feeling people because all of us get angry, get upset. That means we all have some emotion of some kind. We can take that energy and steer it in a loving, generous way, beautiful way, a way that elevates the mind and releases the spirit. All right, we leave it there then. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.